Have you ever tried speaking to a crying child? A kid who just can't pull themselves together long enough to get out a coherent sentence. So they just settle for blubbering, a loud, garbled mess that no one could possibly understand. Or they're so angry that they seem to forget how words work and just scream and stomp instead. As we get older, we get a better hold of our faculties and our abilities to speak while in that high emotional state. But our brain is still that blubbering, screaming mess. So how do we manage that emotion in our kids and in ourselves? I'm Paul for Rock Solid Refuge. In crisis, start here. We've laid the groundwork in the last couple of videos. Don't panic and the basics of communication. You're probably watching this series because of some crisis within your home. So now we're getting to the heart of why you're here. Over the years, we've had a few parents who demand respect from their children. They had this concept of, respect your elders, honor your father and mother, but the parents in turn were not showing respect to their kids. This is a problem. You need to be an example of the sort of behavior that you want to see, especially when in crisis. I know I just kind of referenced the 10 Commandments, but the Bible also says to parents, don't aggravate your children or they will become discouraged. Don't be part of the problem, in other words. At Rock Solid Refuge, we have a sort of three-pronged approach. There's relational influence, role modeling, and authority. Knowing which one of these to rely on at any given moment is a big part of what we do. You also have these to varying degrees in your own kid's life. Now, I'm going to get serious here for a minute. Pause the video and think about this next sentence for a bit, if you need to. Your authority over your child is shrinking, and one day it will be gone. I'm going to say that again, all right? Your authority over your child is shrinking, and one day it will be gone. This is natural. It's normal. But if you haven't been role modeling, if you have no relational influence, then when they move out, that's it. Someone else is going to have that relational influence with them. It won't be you. Usually, it's with a peer, and it's usually not a healthy relationship if the parent's not in the picture. Now, I'm not saying that this means that you should not exercise the parental authority that you do have. There is a time and a place for that. In fact, if you're not exercising any parental authority but acting purely as a peer, well, that's a problem in and of itself. But the time and place to exercise direct authority is rarely in a crisis. We'll talk in a later video about defining boundaries and consequences, but for now, we want to make these moments of crisis a chance to actually build relational influence and role model how to handle a crisis. So, your child is in a crisis. What do you do? The first piece of advice is surprisingly hard to follow, and it may even seem like it's opposed to the idea of relational influence. It's this: give your child time and space. Our natural inclination is to jump into it, start asking questions, try to get to some answers, make right the wrongs. But we need to bring the emotion out of the conversation. Giving time and space is a great way to do that. I remember I was probably about a year out of high school. It was late at night. I was playing cards at a friend's house. His dad was playing with us also. Sue, we'll call her. My friend's older sister comes home and she just quietly, she quickly says, "Hey Dad, I'm off to bed." Hold on, come give me a hug." She did. He said, "You been smoking anything tonight?" "No." "Did you eat anything tonight?" Face got a little bit red, a little grin on her face. And she said, "Brownies?" Sue had been having some edibles, some pot brownies with friends at a party, drove home high. Crisis moment, right? So, what did he do? All right, go to bed. I'm going to talk in the morning. Off she went. I mean, there's a couple of things there, right? Number one, time and space. He was upset, you could tell, but he didn't want to have that conversation while it was late, he was angry, and she was high. Likewise, if your kid stays out till 3 in the morning and you've been sitting in the living room just worried sick, neither of you are at your best. Make sure everything is okay, there's no immediate crisis, then talk in the morning. Now, those are some pretty extreme examples though. That's lots of time, lots. Even 5 minutes can help bring the emotion out of a situation. Just saying something like, hey, we need to talk about this. Do you want to talk now or do you need 5 minutes? If they ask for 5 minutes, go back to them 5 minutes later and say, hey, are you ready now or do you still need a minute? And if they still need a minute, let them have it. Give them time. Let them have some control over when the conversation is going to take place. That can be a very helpful thing in letting people cool off or prepare for a conversation so it doesn't feel like an ambush. Well, now what do? Going back to that Don't Panic episode, remember I said it's not just teens who feel before they think, people feel before they think. So what do if you realize that you're losing control, you're entering a more emotional state of mind? It's okay to acknowledge that you're losing control and that you need to take steps to rein yourself back in. If you need 5 minutes before you engage in a conversation, or even in the middle of a conversation, you feel like you need it or they need it, take it. You'll be better off, and so will your kid. Now, in her book, Quit, Annie Duke talks about her experience as a professional poker player and the danger of the sunk cost fallacy. Basically, the more you lose, the more invested you are in a game and the more you're willing to risk to try to turn things around. So she set a limit for herself. She said, if I'm down $2,000 in a game, I'm going to walk away from the table. She set that limit for herself before entering into a game so that if she began to lose, she had already made the decision to walk away and didn't have to try to make that call while in the heat of the moment. In the same way, you can make choices before potentially charged emotional situations, before these conversations happen. Maybe you decide, if I start yelling or crying, or if my heart is just pounding in my ears, I'll apologize, I'll tell my kid I need 5 minutes to relax, and then I'll re-engage in the conversation. Now, in the heat of the moment, you may forget or ignore that decision, but by choosing your limit beforehand, you're more likely to make a good decision when the chips are down. No pun intended. Now, you may have already figured out the next thing to help bring the emotion down and engage the mind. Simple questions. Having the young person make a simple choice helps engage the part of the brain that deals with critical thinking. In the time and space example, that was the simple question of, do you want to talk now or do you need 5 minutes? It's a simple question. It engages the cognitive part of the brain. Other examples might be, do you want to talk here or do you want to go to the living room? Do you want to sit down or do you want to go for a walk? Do you want to talk to me or do you want to talk to mom? These aren't complicated questions. They're not meant to be, but they are genuine. They are legitimate choices. Other ways to bring emotion out of a situation. Movement, going for a walk or a run, shooting hoops, throwing a ball. They might not always want to do that, and another way is music. This is one that a lot of teens more naturally gravitate towards. Things like this can help a teen move from an emotional state to a more cognitive thinking state. Now, one last thing I wanted to address, especially if there's a teen in your home who is pretty regularly in crisis, you have to look after the whole family and you have to look after yourself. Don't let their dysfunction become the center of everyone's world. Siblings can be neglected, spouses can drift apart, and pain and deep sorrow can grip the entire family. One person in crisis, especially consistent crisis, has an impact on the entire family. So don't neglect your spouse if you're married. Don't neglect your kids if you have them. And don't neglect your own mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being. Living in a home dominated by dysfunction can be traumatic. It is traumatic. A teenager in crisis is a family in crisis. All right, so let's take a minute now and recap all of this. We've covered a lot today, so let me just encourage you a bit and say, you're going to screw it up, all right? But when you do, focus on the positives. Get up, dust yourself off, try again. All right, so the first thing we talked about, your authority over your child is shrinking. You need to focus these times of crisis on building relationship and role modeling positive behavior. Positive behaviors like the communication practices we had talked about in the last video. All right, number 2, bring emotion out of the conversation by giving time and space, by asking simple questions or offering simple choices, and through movement or music if circumstance allows it. And finally, don't neglect your family through all of this. Working with a struggling teen is really difficult and it's draining on all the relationships. Don't let that dysfunction become the soul of the family. Care for one another and care for yourself. You're not going to be a big help if you're a big mess. Now, also remember that no video series or book can give you the individual help that you need for your specific struggles. Seek out professional, individual help to best guide you on the path to restoration. Okay, we are still not done with communication. We need to talk about honesty, goal setting, and seeing movement in your kid. We're going to hit those things in the next video. In crisis, start here.